This audiobook, we will explore how to upgrade your brain so learning becomes easier, memory lasts longer, and knowledge becomes part of who you are, not just something you once read, briefly understood, and then lost. You will learn why your brain is more adaptable than you've been told, why attention must come before memory, and how simple scientific learning tools can turn ordinary study into long-term mastery. More importantly, you will discover how to apply these ideas to real life, so you can build a mind that gives you an unfair advantage. This is not about being a genius. It's about learning how to learn strategically, intentionally, and repeatedly. It's about protecting the most valuable cognitive machine you own and upgrading it with habits, systems, and choices that compound over time. If you commit to this process, the payoff will follow you for the rest of your life. In this audiobook, we will unlock a framework for learning faster, remembering longer, and building a brain that keeps improving year after year. This is your opportunity to step into the identity of a lifelong learner, a person who turns knowledge into capability and capability into confidence. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Build a brain that learns efficiently. To upgrade your ability to learn, you must first understand that the brain isn't a fixed machine, it's a living system. It changes, adapts, reorganizes, and rewires based on how you use it. Scientists call this neuroplasticity, but you don't need the scientific term to benefit from it. What matters is this: the brain you have today is not the brain you must live with tomorrow. It can get sharper, it can get faster, it can become more capable, and with the right inputs, it will. Learning efficiently means getting more value out of every hour you spend learning. Most people don't have a learning problem, they have an efficiency problem. They try to learn through force, reading the same page over and over, or watching videos non-stop, hoping that repetition will magically create understanding. But learning isn't just about exposure, it's about processing. It's about making sense of what you take in and linking it to what you already know. To build a brain that learns efficiently, start by giving it what it needs. Attention, clarity, attention, focuses the mind. Clarity makes information meaningful. Structure keeps knowledge accessible when you need it later. Without these three ingredients, learning becomes random, superficial, and easily forgotten. With them, learning becomes faster, smoother, and more enjoyable. Your brain loves patterns. It learns best when information connects, rather than floats around as isolated facts. When you understand how ideas relate to each other, the brain forms networks of meaning. These networks become shortcuts. They make it easier to retrieve knowledge, to use it in new situations, and to build new ideas on top of old ones. That's what efficient learning looks like. Ideas stacking on ideas, knowledge compounding instead of evaporating. Another part of efficient learning is understanding the difference between recognition and recall. Recognition is when you see something and think, I know this. Recall is when you remember it, without any cues. Recognition feels easier, so the brain loves it, but recall builds true memory. Efficient learners train recall. They force the brain to retrieve knowledge without hints, without prompts, without someone reminding them. That one shift alone transforms how long information stays with you. Efficiency also means reducing cognitive waste. Every distraction, every notification, every mental detour steals processing power from the brain. When the mind is scattered, learning slows. When the mind is centered, learning accelerates. This is why environments matter. This is why habits matter. This is why systems matter. They protect the brain from friction, so learning can flow. Finally, efficient learning depends on identity. If you see yourself as someone who learns quickly, the brain adapts to that expectation. If you see yourself as someone who struggles, the brain adapts to that as well. The brain listens to the story you repeat, so choose a better story. Say it often, live into it. You don't need more lectures, you don't need more motivational slogans. What you need is a brain built for efficiency, one that absorbs, organizes, and recalls with ease. When you build that brain, learning stops feeling like a chore and starts feeling like a superpower. And once that shift happens, everything else becomes easier. Chapter 2. Train your attention before you train your memory. Before you can remember anything, you must first pay attention to it. Attention is the gatekeeper of learning. If information doesn't make it through the gate, it never becomes memory. It doesn't matter how interesting the subject is, how intelligent you are, or how badly you want to learn. Without attention, nothing sticks. And yet, attention is the skill almost no one trains. We spend hours trying to memorize, hoping our brain will cooperate, when the real bottleneck is earlier in the chain. Memory is not the first step. Attention is. Think about how many times you've read a page only to realize you have no idea what you just read. Your eyes moved across the words. Your brain registered the shapes. But attention wasn't present. You scanned the content, but you didn't engage with it. And because you didn't engage, nothing encoded. The brain cannot store what the mind never noticed. This is why attention is such a powerful multiplier. When you improve attention, every form of learning improves along with it. Attention is not just about focus, it's about removing competition. Your brain cannot fully attend to multiple things at once. Multitasking is a myth when it comes to deep learning. The brain switches rapidly between tasks, paying superficial attention to all and deep attention to none. This constant switching slows comprehension and weakens memory, because every switch carries a cognitive cost. Efficient learners understand this. They trade multitasking for monotasking. One task, one focus, one channel of mental energy at a time. Training attention starts with eliminating noise, mental noise, digital noise, environmental noise. Learning in a state of distraction is like trying to plant seeds in a windstorm. You can throw as many seeds as you want, but very few take root. One of the simplest ways to upgrade attention is to control your environment. Remove optional distractions before you begin. Put the phone away, silence notifications, clear visual clutter. These small adjustments signal to your brain that something important is about to happen, and the brain responds by allocating more resources. But attention isn't just environmental, it's also internal. Your mind has its own distractions: rumination, anxiety, anticipation, daydreaming. These internal disruptions are often more powerful than the external ones, because you carry them with you. The key here is cognitive presence, training the brain to stay in the moment long enough for learning to occur. You do this by building mental endurance, the same way you build physical endurance, progressively. Start with short blocks of focused attention and expand them over time. 10 minutes of deep attention can be far more valuable than an hour of half-distracted drifting. Another important element of attention is intention. When the brain knows why it should care about something, it pays more attention to it. Learning becomes deeper, faster, and more durable when you give your brain a target. Before you read a chapter or watch a lecture, ask simple intentional questions. What am I trying to learn? What do I want to remember? Why does this matter? These questions are not just motivational tricks. They prime the brain for relevance, and the brain remembers what it considers relevant. Attention also improves through active engagement. If you sit back and consume content passively, your brain will wander because it has no job. It's similar to giving a child nothing to do and expecting them not to get bored. The brain is built to participate, not just observe. You can activate engagement through simple techniques: asking questions while learning, pausing to summarize, imagining how you would explain the idea to someone else, or connecting the information to something you already know. These small acts tell the brain, this matters, stay here, and the brain listens. There's also a physical dimension to attention. The brain's attentional circuits run on energy, sleep, hydration, nutrition, and movement. All influence how much attention you have available. You might blame yourself for lacking focus, when the real issue is that your brain is underfueled or overstressed. A tired brain learns slowly. A stressed brain learns defensively. A nourished brain learns freely. Treat attention as a resource, something you can protect, invest and replenish. But perhaps the most powerful truth about attention is this: attention is a choice. You choose what to give your mind to. You choose what gets access to your time. You choose what you allow to interrupt you. And over time, these choices become habits. Some people build attentional strength, deep, steady mental presence. Others build attentional weakness, fragmented, reactive, easily hijacked focus. Both are trained. One leads to clarity and competence. The other leads to confusion and cognitive fatigue. If you want to upgrade your memory, begin by upgrading your attention. Because memory is downstream of attention. If attention is sharp, memory is possible. If attention is dull, memory collapses. This simple truth will save you years of frustration. You don't have to force your brain to remember. You don't have to memorize through brute repetition. When your attention is present, your brain does the encoding naturally and automatically. So train your attention first. Give it structure. Give it protection. Give it purpose. When you do, learning becomes faster, memory becomes stronger, and knowledge begins to stay with you instead of slipping away. And once that happens, you'll realize that attention was never just a cognitive skill. It was a competitive advantage. Chapter 3. Turn information into understanding, not just data. To truly upgrade your brain, you must learn to transform information into understanding. Information is everywhere. Understanding is rare. Information is easy to collect. Understanding takes work. And yet, understanding is what the brain remembers, uses and applies. Data without meaning slips away. Data without context evaporates. But when information becomes understanding, when it becomes part of your mental map, it sticks. The reason so many people forget what they learn is simple. They collect information the way others collect souvenirs, interesting in the moment, but rarely used again. They read a book, highlight a few sentences, feel intellectually stimulated, and then move on. Weeks later, they can barely explain what the book was about. It's not because their memory is bad, it's because their learning stayed shallow. Shallow learning feels productive, but it doesn't produce understanding. It creates the illusion of knowing, not the reality of knowing. Understanding begins with depth. Depth means slowing down long enough for the brain to process what something actually means. Most people rush through content because they want to consume more. They want to finish the course, finish the article, finish the video. But learning isn't about finishing, it's about absorbing, it's about integrating. The brain needs time to convert information into personal knowledge. When you slow down, you give your brain the chance to ask the most important learning question. How does this fit into what I already know? The brain builds understanding through connection. Every new idea must attach to something familiar. If there's nothing to attach to, the idea floats. It becomes trivia, interesting but unanchored. That's why knowledge compounds faster when you have a base to attach it to. The more you know about a topic, the easier it becomes to learn more about that topic. Learning is not linear, it's exponential, once the foundation is in place. One of the best ways to deepen understanding is to look for mental models, structures that explain how something works. Mental models simplify complexity without oversimplifying the truth. They help you take raw information and organize it into something meaningful. Instead of memorizing hundreds of facts, you learn the structure behind them. This is how experts think. They don't recall endless details, they understand patterns, and when you understand patterns, details become easier to learn and easier to remember. Another key to understanding is asking better questions. Questions activate curiosity. Curiosity activates attention, and attention activates memory. Instead of passively absorbing information, ask questions such as, why is this true? What problem does this solve? What is the principle behind this? What would change if this were false? Questions force the brain to engage. They force the brain to reason. And reasoning is where understanding lives. Teaching is another powerful tool for understanding. When you teach something, even informally, you are forced to clarify your thoughts. You must fill in the gaps. You must explain the logic. Teaching exposes what you don't know and strengthens what you do. Many people believe they understand something because it feels familiar, but they cannot explain it clearly. Familiarity is not understanding. Explanation is. The rule is simple. If you can't teach it, you don't truly understand it. Analogies and metaphors also help convert information into understanding. The brain loves comparisons because they shrink the distance between the known and the unknown. When you compare a new concept to something familiar, you build a bridge that helps the brain cross into clarity. Some of the greatest thinkers in history used analogy as a primary teaching tool for this reason. It turns complexity into something the brain can digest. Another important part of understanding is context. Context answers the questions, when does this matter, and where does this apply? Information without context is like directions without a destination. You might know the steps, but you don't know when to use them. When you understand context, knowledge becomes usable. You begin to see opportunities to apply what you know, and application is the final stage of understanding. Once you can apply something, it becomes internalized. It becomes part of your thinking. This also explains why repetition without understanding rarely works. When you repeat something you don't understand, the brain treats it like noise. It feels forced. It doesn't stick. But when you understand something, repetition strengthens it. Understanding makes repetition efficient. Repetition makes understanding durable. Together they form memory that lasts. To turn information into understanding, you must also avoid intellectual hoarding. Intellectual hoarding is the habit of consuming more than you integrate. Content becomes entertainment instead of transformation. The mind becomes cluttered with disconnected fragments. The cure is simple. Integrate as you go. After learning something, pause and ask, how would I explain this? How does this connect? How would I use this in real life? That pause is where learning becomes real. In the end, your brain doesn't reward you for how much information you collect. It rewards you for what you understand. Understanding is the bridge between knowledge and capability. It turns learning into usefulness. And when you build this ability, when you turn data into meaning, your brain stops being a storage device and becomes an instrument for thinking. That is the upgrade you are aiming for. Chapter 4. Make learning active, not passive. Passive learning feels comfortable. You sit, you listen, you watch, you read. Information comes toward you, and you let it wash over you. It feels like learning because it feels productive. It feels easy. It feels smooth. But passive learning does not create mastery. It does not build memory. It does not produce understanding. It produces familiarity. And familiarity is fragile. It fades quickly and gives you the illusion that you know something long before you actually do. Active learning is the opposite. Active learning makes the brain participate. It forces engagement. It requires effort. It pushes you to think, reason, explain, retrieve, connect, apply, and evaluate. And because the brain is working, the learning becomes deeper, stronger, and far more resistant to forgetting. The difference between passive learning and active learning is the difference between watching someone swim and actually being in the water. Watching feels easier. Doing produces skill. One of the most powerful forms of active learning is retrieval. Retrieval means pulling information out of your brain without looking at it. When you retrieve, you tell your brain, this matters, keep this, strengthen this. Retrieval is memory training. It rewires circuits. It deepens recall. And yet, most people avoid retrieval because it feels harder than rereading or rewatching. Hard does not mean wrong. Hard often means effective. Another form of active learning is explanation. If you can explain something in simple language, without jargon, without notes, without hiding behind complexity, it means you truly understand it. When you explain, you organize ideas, you connect concepts, you simplify structure, you expose gaps, you discover whether you actually know what you think you know. This is why great teachers learn faster than their students. Teaching forces active learning, and active learning forces growth. Application is another mode of active learning. When you use what you learn, the brain upgrades it from theory to skill. Theory alone rarely sticks. Skills stick because the brain has seen them work in the real world. When you apply something, solve a problem, perform a task, use a method, the learning moves from conceptual to experiential. Experience leaves cognitive residue. It lasts. Active learning can also involve questioning. Asking questions turns information into curiosity fuel. Questions activate the mind. They create gaps that the brain wants to fill. And curiosity is one of the strongest drivers of attention and memory. Instead of asking, what did I learn? Ask, what didn't I understand? What surprised me? What challenged what I believed? Where could this be wrong? These questions turn knowledge into exploration instead of accumulation. Another important element of active learning is transformation. Don't just consume information, transform it. Take notes in your own words. Turn paragraphs into diagrams. Convert ideas into summaries. Break concepts into steps. Compare, contrast, categorize. Every time you reshape an idea, you deepen your grasp of it. The brain doesn't remember what it merely touches. It remembers what it reshapes. To make learning active, you must also slow down consumption. Passive learners rush. They chase content volume instead of content value. They want to finish the book, finish the video, finish the course. But learning doesn't reward finishing. It rewards processing. If the goal is speed, you consume more. If the goal is mastery, you do less, but think more. The world is full of people who have consumed a mountain of information, but can't explain any of it. Don't become one of them. Active learning also benefits from spacing. When you revisit information across time, the brain reinforces pathways and rebuilds recall. Spacing works best when you engage with the material actively each time, testing yourself, explaining again, summarizing again, recalling again. Passive repetition is weak. Active repetition is powerful. Even reading can become active. Most people read passively. Their eyes move, their brain drifts, and little gets encoded. To read actively, you highlight selectively, summarize occasionally, pause frequently, and ask questions continuously. You make the text work. You make the ideas move. You give the brain something to do beyond scanning words. Another distinction to understand is that passive learning feels good in the moment, but produces little growth, while active learning feels harder in the moment, but produces lasting growth. This is true across every domain. Learning a language, mastering a skill, understanding a concept, remembering a fact, solving a problem. The brain grows through challenge, not comfort. If your goal is to upgrade your brain, you must choose growth over ease. The brain loves efficiency, but it is built by effort. Effort is the signal for adaptation. When learning feels slightly uncomfortable, slightly effortful, slightly demanding, that is often when the brain is upgrading. The improvement begins with a simple shift in identity. Stop seeing yourself as a consumer of information and start seeing yourself as a transformer of information. Consumer learning leads to familiarity. Transformational learning leads to mastery, and mastery is what stays with you for life. So make learning active. Think, retrieve, explain, question, apply, transform, teach. These are the verbs of mastery. These are the habits of intelligent learners. When you adopt them, you shift from someone who takes in knowledge to someone who internalizes it. And once you reach that level, learning becomes not just faster, but permanent. Chapter 5. Use spaced repetition to lock knowledge in. Memory is not an event, it's a process. The brain does not store information perfectly the first time you encounter it. Instead, it stabilizes memory in layers, strengthening connections through repeated retrieval across time. This process explains why you remember the things you use often and forget the things you only touch once. The brain is efficient. It keeps what seems important and discards what doesn't. Spaced repetition is the method of telling your brain, this is important, keep strengthening it. It is one of the most powerful tools for long-term memory and, ironically, one of the most underused. Most people try to memorize through cramming, putting large amounts of information into short bursts of time. Cramming feels productive because you can temporarily recall the material, but temporary recall is not the goal. Retention is. Cramming produces short-term memory that fades quickly. It allows you to pass an exam today, but forget everything next week. Spaced repetition does the opposite. It spreads the learning over time, using intervals that grow progressively longer as the memory becomes stronger. This method aligns with how the brain naturally forgets. As the brain tries to drop information, spaced repetition pulls it back, reinforcing the signal. The science behind this is rooted in the forgetting curve. After learning something once, your ability to recall it drops sharply within hours or days. Most people let the memory die. Spaced repetition interrupts the curve at the right moments, just as the memory starts to weaken, forcing the brain to rebuild it. Every time you retrieve something at the edge of forgetting, the memory becomes more durable. It becomes easier to recall, faster to access, and more deeply integrated into your cognitive network. There are several ways to practice spaced repetition, but they all share one principle: review information at increasing intervals. Day 1, Day 3, Day 7, Day 14, Day 30. The exact pattern may vary, but the logic stays the same. You give your brain time to forget, just enough so the retrieval requires effort. That effort is crucial. Easy recall doesn't strengthen memory. Effortful recall does. The harder your brain has to work without completely failing, the stronger the memory becomes. Retrieval is not the same as rereading. Rereading feels familiar and comfortable. You look at the words again, and the brain says, yes, I recognize this. Recognition feels like understanding, but it's shallow. It creates the illusion of knowledge. Retrieval asks something far more demanding. Can you recall this without looking? That question rewires neurons. That question accelerates learning. That question builds long-term memory. Spaced repetition works beautifully with knowledge, vocabulary, concepts, skills, and even habits. Musicians use it when they practice sections of music across days and weeks. Athletes use it when they drill fundamentals over a season. Language learners use it to lock in vocabulary. The method scales across domains because it works with how the brain naturally consolidates information. If you want to remember something for months or years, spaced repetition is the closest thing to a guarantee. Technology has made spaced repetition easier than ever. Systems like digital flashcards or apps can schedule reviews automatically, but you don't need software to apply the principle. A simple notebook, calendar, or review schedule works as well. The method matters more than the tool. The structure matters more than the convenience. The point is to revisit information intentionally, not randomly. One of the hidden benefits of spaced repetition is confidence. Forgetting can feel discouraging, especially when you care about learning. You read a book, feel inspired, and then weeks later you struggle to recall even the main ideas. Spaced repetition protects you from this discouragement. It turns knowledge into something you can rely on. When you can retrieve information on command, you feel capable, you feel intelligent, you feel in control of your learning. Confidence is not just emotional, it is cognitive reinforcement. But spaced repetition has another deeper purpose. It allows knowledge to compound. When ideas stick, they can connect to new ideas. When they connect, understanding expands. And when understanding expands, learning accelerates. This is why some people seem to learn faster as they get older. They have a knowledge base that makes new learning easier. Spaced repetition builds that base. To apply this to your life, start simple. Choose a topic you care about, something you want to keep with you, not just consume and forget. After your first exposure, review it the next day. Then review it again a few days later, then a week later, then a month later. Each time don't just skim, retrieve, explain, summarize, question, engage. Effort makes it stick. In the end, spaced repetition is not just a learning technique, it is a philosophy. It rejects the idea that learning is a single moment. It embraces the idea that learning is a cycle. Exposure, forgetting, retrieval, strengthening, repeat. That cycle is how knowledge becomes durable. That cycle is how the brain upgrades. And if you keep practicing it, knowledge will not just pass through your life. It will accumulate and stay. Chapter 6. Use association to make memory stick. Memory thrives on association. The brain does not store information in isolation. It stores information by linking it to other information. The stronger the link, the stronger the memory. When something is meaningful, emotional, surprising, vivid, funny, exaggerated, or connected to something you already know, the brain treats it differently. It stands out. It takes priority. It sticks. This is why you can remember faces from years ago, but forget where you placed your keys this morning. One had a network of associations attached to it. The other had none. Association is the glue of memory. It turns raw data into connected knowledge. And the more you amplify association, the more easily you remember. This is not a trick. This is how the brain is built. It evolved to survive through pattern recognition, not rote memorization. When a piece of information connects to an emotion, a location, a story, or a pattern, the brain locks it in because it sees relevance. Association tells the brain, this matters beyond this moment. One of the simplest forms of association is visualization. When you imagine a picture, especially a vivid or exaggerated picture, memory becomes easier. The brain is incredible at remembering images. It struggles with abstractions. If you want to remember someone's name, and their name is Lily, imagining them holding a bright bouquet of lilies connects the name to a visual anchor. It takes seconds, yet it changes your ability to retrieve the information later. The brain recalls images quickly because they activate more sensory pathways. Another powerful form of association is the memory palace, also known as the method of Loci. This technique involves placing information inside an imaginary space, often a familiar location such as your home. You take the ideas, numbers or facts you want to remember, and mentally place them on top of objects or areas in the space. Then to recall them, you walk through the space in your mind. This method has been used for thousands of years. Orators, scholars and memory champions have used it to store entire speeches, long sequences, or structured content. The reason it works is because it attaches memory to something stable and spatial. The brain remembers spaces effortlessly. Association also works through storytelling. Stories are the ultimate memory containers. A long list of facts is boring and easily forgotten, but when those same facts are embedded into a narrative, they become memorable. Stories provide cause and effect. They provide emotion. They provide context. And context tells the brain how information fits into the bigger picture. This is why we remember the plot of a movie we saw years ago, but not the list of dates we memorized for a test. Stories give the brain something to hang on to. Chunking is another association technique. Chunking means taking multiple separate pieces of information and grouping them into a single unit. A phone number becomes easier to remember when broken into 3 chunks rather than 10 individual digits. Your working memory struggles with large amounts of ungrouped data, but when grouped, the brain can handle more because it processes the chunks as one. This is how experts in any field store extraordinary amounts of knowledge. They don't memorize more, they chunk more. Association also happens through analogy. Analogies allow you to learn something new by linking it to something you already understand. When you compare a new concept to a familiar one, the brain saves time and energy. It says, "This is like that," and in doing so transfers understanding across domains. Teachers use analogies because they accelerate comprehension and retention at the same time. Emotion is one of the strongest associative forces. If something makes you laugh, cry, fear, or wonder, memory strengthens automatically. The brain prioritizes emotionally charged experiences for survival reasons. If you can attach emotion to information, even mildly, you amplify retention. This is why motivational learning often sticks longer than dry instruction. The emotion creates an adhesive layer around the ideas. Even small associations can make a big difference. Associating a concept with a color, associating a person with a profession, associating a date with a holiday. These are simple memory hooks. The brain loves hooks. The more hooks you hang knowledge on, the fewer chances it has to fall. But here's the deeper truth. Association makes learning enjoyable. It turns memory into a creative process rather than a mechanical one. When memory becomes playful, it becomes sustainable. When it becomes sustainable, it becomes powerful. You no longer feel like you are forcing information into your head. You feel like you are building a network, because you are. To apply association in your life, you don't need to use every technique at once. Start small. When you learn something new, ask, what does this remind me of? Lie. What can I connect this to? How could I visualize this? What's the story here? How would I explain this to someone using something they already know? Each question adds a hook. Each hook strengthens the memory. Memory is rarely about capacity. It is about connection. If you give the brain isolated information, it will behave like a sieve. If you give the brain connected information, it will behave like a web, and a web does not easily lose what it catches. When you learn to associate instead of merely memorize, the brain starts working with you instead of against you. Knowledge starts to stick. Ideas start to organize. Recall becomes faster. Understanding becomes deeper. And learning becomes something you can trust. That is the power of association. Chapter 7. Build mental systems, not random facts. One of the biggest upgrades you can give your brain is to shift from collecting facts to building systems. Facts are isolated. Systems are connected. Facts are fragile. Systems are durable. Facts are hard to recall. Systems are easy to navigate. When you think in systems, the brain doesn't have to search through a sea of disconnected information. It uses structure, and structure makes knowledge usable. Most people learn by collecting facts. They gather bits of information from books, videos, conversations, and courses. They feel smarter because they have accumulated knowledge, but accumulation is not the same as integration. When you accumulate without integrating, the brain becomes cluttered. You can't remember where things fit. You can't retrieve knowledge when you need it, and you can't apply it confidently. The result is mental confusion instead of mental clarity. Systems fix this problem by creating relationships between ideas. When information is part of a system, it has a location in your mind. It has a purpose. It has context, and the brain thrives on context. Think about how much easier it is to remember the layout of a city than a list of random street names. You could memorize 50 street names and forget them quickly, or you could spend time exploring the city and easily recall routes, landmarks, and connections. The difference is structure. Experts in any field don't just know more facts. They organize facts into frameworks. A framework is a mental scaffold that shows how ideas relate. When a new idea appears, an expert doesn't store it randomly. They plug it into their system, and that plug-in process is what makes the idea stick. This is why learning becomes easier the deeper you go into a subject. Once you have a system, everything has a place. Systems also reduce cognitive load. The brain has limited working memory. If every new piece of information requires a fresh mental effort to store, memory becomes exhausting. But when information fits into an existing system, the cost drops dramatically. The brain loves efficiency, and systems provide it. A powerful example of a system is categorization. Categorization groups ideas based on similarity or function. The moment something is categorized, the brain assigns it relationships. It is no longer alone. It belongs to a group, and that belonging makes it easier to recall. This is why you can remember hundreds of animal names, tool names, or food names without much training. You stored them in categories over time. Another type of mental system is a schema. A schema is a mental blueprint of how something works. When you have a schema, you can interpret new information faster because you already have a model for it. A chess master can glance at a board and instantly understand the strategy because they have schemas for patterns, threats, and opportunities. A beginner sees chaos because they have no system yet. Knowledge also needs hierarchy. Hierarchy organizes ideas from general to specific. When you start with general concepts, you create mental hooks. Then the more specific details can attach to those hooks. Think of it like a tree. The big ideas are the branches. The details are the leaves. You can't attach leaves without branches. Many learners do the opposite. They memorize leaves with no branches to hold them, so they fall off quickly. Systems also allow compression. Compression means representing large knowledge using a small number of principles. Physics compresses many phenomena into a few fundamental laws. Business strategy compresses decisions into frameworks. Mastery compresses complexity. When you build compression into your mental systems, recall becomes faster because the brain doesn't need to search through everything. It just retrieves the principles and expands them when needed. Building systems is not only about academic subjects. You can build systems for learning itself, how you take notes, how you review, how you practice, how you apply. Without a system, learning becomes reactive and chaotic. With a system it becomes deliberate and efficient. Even habits are easier when they are part of a system. A habit without a system relies on willpower. A habit within a system relies on structure. To begin building mental systems, ask yourself simple but powerful questions. How does this fit with what I already know? What category does this belong to? What principle explains this? What pattern does this follow? Where would I store this concept? Each question forces the brain to integrate instead of merely collect. Another practical step is note organization. Many people take notes that act like storage. They capture information but never convert it. To build systems, notes should be reorganized, summarized, and connected over time. Instead of a pile of disconnected pages, you create maps, diagrams, frameworks, and summaries. You turn data into structure. The ultimate benefit of systems is transfer. When you have systems, you can apply knowledge in new situations. Transfer is the real measure of learning. If you can use what you know in a different context, the learning has matured. Transfer is what separates memorization from intelligence. In the end, building mental systems is not just about remembering more, it is about thinking better. It allows the brain to navigate complexity, handle information overload, and make decisions with clarity. When you shift from storing facts to building systems, learning stops being a burden and becomes a strategic advantage. That is how you upgrade the brain for the long term. Chapter 8. Learn faster by teaching what you know. One of the fastest ways to learn something deeply is to teach it. When you teach, you activate a different mode of learning, a mode that forces clarity, forces structure, forces recall, and forces understanding. Teaching is not just a way of sharing knowledge, it is a way of strengthening it. People often believe they need to become experts before they can teach, but the truth is reversed. Teaching is how you become an expert. When you teach something, even informally, your brain must take what you know and reshape it. You cannot hide behind familiarity. You cannot rely on recognition. You must retrieve the information, organize it, and present it in a coherent way. That process alone upgrades your memory. Retrieval strengthens recall. Organization strengthens understanding. Explanation strengthens clarity. All three are pillars of accelerated learning. Think about the last time you explained something to someone. You probably noticed gaps in your knowledge. Teaching exposes those gaps quickly. It shows you what you truly understand and what you only think you understand. The illusion of knowing is one of the biggest dangers in learning, and teaching destroys that illusion fast. If you can explain it, you own it. If you struggle to explain it, you know exactly where to improve. Teaching also forces simplification. The ability to simplify something is one of the clearest signs of mastery. Anyone can make a simple idea sound complicated. True intellect makes a complicated idea sound simple. This is why great teachers are often the best learners. They are constantly refining their explanations until the ideas become elegant. Elegant ideas are memorable because they reduce cognitive load. They become easier to retrieve and easier to apply. Another powerful benefit of teaching is that it requires sequencing. To teach something, you must decide what comes first, what comes second, and how the ideas connect. Most people don't realize how much sequencing matters until they try to explain something that seems obvious in their own mind, but makes no sense to someone else. When you teach, you build these sequences consciously. You build frameworks. You build logic. These become part of your mental systems, making new learning faster and smoother. Teaching also increases engagement. When you know you will have to teach what you learn, you pay attention differently. You take better notes. You ask better questions. You observe structure. You look for patterns. The act of learning becomes active instead of passive. Even before you teach, the expectation of teaching pulls you into a deeper level of thought. You no longer read just to read. You read to explain. And that shift alone upgrades the brain. Some of the best learners in the world use this strategy without calling it teaching. Writers teach through words. Speakers teach through voice. Programmers teach through comments and documentation. Researchers teach through papers. Leaders teach through guidance. Whenever a person explains, they are teaching, and whenever they teach, they reinforce their own knowledge. Teaching also enhances transfer. Transfer means using knowledge in new situations. When you teach, especially with examples, your brain practices applying the information in different contexts. It builds bridges. It forms general principles. Transfer is where learning becomes ability, and teaching accelerates that process. It's also worth noting that teaching does not require an audience. You can teach to a friend, to a notebook, to a mirror, or to your future self. Some of the most effective teaching strategies are private. For example, one powerful method is the explain it back technique. After learning something, you explain it back in your own words without looking at the source. You teach the empty room. You teach your imaginary student. You teach your past self who knew nothing. The more you teach, the more you learn. Another method is to write summaries. When you summarize, you are teaching on paper. You compress information. You extract meaning. You filter noise. You decide what is essential and what is not. This filtration process is where understanding strengthens. The brain doesn't remember everything, nor should it. The brain remembers what is integrated. Teaching also helps you build confidence. When you can explain something clearly, your belief in your own intelligence increases. Confidence is not just emotional, it reinforces cognitive performance. When you believe you are capable of learning, the brain engages more deeply, takes more risks, and handles complexity better. People underestimate how much perception affects cognition. Now here is an important distinction. Teaching is not the same as performing. Teaching does not require perfection. It does not require charisma. It does not require status. Teaching requires intention. The intention to understand deeply enough to explain. That intention is what upgrades the brain. To apply this principle, you don't need a classroom. You need a simple rule. After you learn something, teach it, even for 5 minutes. Teach it to someone else, or teach it to yourself. Do it repeatedly. Do it without notes. Do it until the explanation feels clean and effortless. At that moment, you will know that the information has moved from the surface of your mind to the structure of your mind. Learning is not complete when you understand. Learning is complete when you can explain. That is the point where knowledge becomes part of you. That is the point where the brain upgrades. And if you adopt teaching as a habit, not as something you do occasionally, but as something you do every time you learn, you will learn faster than most people ever will. Chapter 9. Read like a strategist, not a collector. Reading is one of the most powerful tools for upgrading your brain, but only if you read strategically. Most people read to collect information. They read to finish books. They read to feel productive. They read to say they've read something. But reading without strategy often leads to very little retention and even less application. Thousands of pages go through the brain and leave almost nothing behind. If the goal is to learn faster and remember longer, you must shift from reading as consumption to reading as transformation. Reading like a strategist begins with changing the purpose. Don't read to finish. Read to understand. Don't read to accumulate. Read to apply. Don't read to impress. Read to evolve. When the purpose changes, the way you interact with the text changes. Your brain begins scanning for structure, tools, principles, and patterns, rather than trivia and quotes. You start asking different questions as you read. What is the core idea here? How does this connect to what I already know? How would I use this in the real world? These questions activate attention, and attention activates memory. Strategic readers also know that not everything deserves to be read in the same way. Some material is light and can be skimmed. Some material is dense and requires slow digestion. Some material is reference-based and best revisited instead of consumed once. Some books are not worth finishing, and quitting them frees you to spend your time on the books that actually matter. Intelligent readers do not measure success by how many books they complete, but by how much value they extract. A single well-read book can transform your thinking more than 20 rushed ones ever could. To read strategically, you must also learn how to separate signal from noise. Signal is what truly matters, the core arguments, the frameworks, the principles, the insights. Noise is everything else, the filler anecdotes, repetition, storytelling fluff, and decorative examples that may make the text pleasant, but do not always strengthen your understanding. Many books contain one powerful idea, surrounded by 200 pages of packaging. A strategic reader focuses on extracting the idea, not drowning in the packaging. Another element of strategic reading is pacing. People often rush because they want to get through material quickly. But rushing kills depth. It kills connection. It kills retention. If you read too fast, the brain cannot process deeply enough to store what you learned. Reading is not a race. The winners are the ones who retain and apply. Slow down for complexity. Speed up for simplicity. Pause when something is important. Reread when necessary. Reading strategically is a rhythm, not a sprint. Annotation is a powerful strategy as well. Highlighting alone often does nothing. Many people highlight endlessly, only to never revisit what they highlighted. Annotation is different. Annotating means responding to the text, writing a note, asking a question, forming an opinion, linking an idea. When you annotate, you converse with the author. You do not merely consume the information, you interact with it. That interaction forces processing, and processing strengthens memory. Strategic readers also extract ideas into their own language. If you cannot summarize a concept cleanly in your own words, you don't fully understand it. Summaries compress knowledge. They remove fluff. They expose structure. A paragraph becomes a sentence. A complex framework becomes a simple principle. Compression is a sign of comprehension. And when you compress something, you make it easier to remember and easier to use later. But reading strategically also means being selective about what you read. The world has more information than you could consume in several lifetimes. This abundance requires filtering. Ask yourself, what do I need to learn right now? What will move me forward? What aligns with my goals? Reading randomly is better than not reading at all. But reading intentionally is many times more powerful. Intent makes learning relevant, and relevance makes learning sticky. Another essential strategy is integration. After reading, ask, how do I apply this? Where does this fit into my thinking? What actions follow from this idea? Application transforms reading from entertainment into capability. Without application, knowledge stays abstract. With application, knowledge becomes skill. The brain remembers skills far more easily than theories. Strategic readers also revisit material. The idea that you must read something once and move on is one of the biggest myths of learning. Great books deserve multiple readings because each reading occurs with a different brain. You read once to discover. You read again to understand. You read later to integrate. Repetition at intervals turns important ideas into long-term knowledge. Repetition is not redundant. It is how memory matures. Finally, reading strategically changes how you store information. Instead of leaving it scattered across pages and highlights, you organize it into categories, mind maps, summaries, or frameworks. You create mental systems so new knowledge can attach and compound. Books stop being isolated experiences and start becoming part of your thinking apparatus. When you shift from being a collector of books to being a strategist of books, reading stops being a hobby and becomes a competitive advantage. You read to learn, you learn to understand. You understand to apply, and you apply to grow. That cycle is how you upgrade your brain. One idea at a time, one system at a time, one book at a time. Chapter 10. Take better notes for better memory. Learning does not end when you encounter new information. Learning becomes durable when you capture, process, and revisit it. Notes are not just a record of information, they are a tool for thinking. The quality of your notes directly affects the quality of your memory and understanding. Weak notes lead to weak recall. Strong notes become an extension of your mind. And yet, most people never learn how to take notes effectively. They write down too much, too little, or the wrong things entirely. The purpose of note-taking is not transcription. It is transformation. Transcription means copying what you hear or read word for word. That requires almost no thinking, which means it produces almost no retention. Transformation involves summarizing, restructuring, interpreting, and connecting information in your own language. When you transform, the brain works harder. That work strengthens memory. The goal is simple. Take notes, the way your future self will understand, not the way the original author said it. Effective note-taking begins with deciding what to capture. Not everything deserves to be written down. Notes should focus on ideas, principles, frameworks, steps, definitions, explanations, and examples, not filler. Highlight the structure of information rather than the decoration. Ask yourself, what is the author actually saying? What problem does this idea solve? How does this connect to what I already know? These questions sharpen the attention filter, and attention is the foundation of memory. One powerful shift is moving from linear notes to structured notes. Linear notes follow the order of information. Structured notes reorganize the information to match how the brain thinks. The brain doesn't store knowledge as a long sequence. It stores it as clusters, categories, and networks. Techniques like mind mapping, outlining, and hierarchical notes mimic this structure. They reveal relationships between ideas instead of burying them. Another advanced method is the Cornell system, which divides notes into 3 sections: key ideas on the left, explanations and details on the right, and a summary at the bottom. The summary forces compression. The left column forces retrieval cues, and the main section captures content. The result is a set of notes designed not just for storage, but for later review and recall. Then there's the Zettel-Kasten method, popular among writers and researchers. Instead of keeping notes in bulk pages, each idea becomes its own card or note. These cards are then linked to related ideas. Over time, a network of knowledge forms. This system mirrors how the brain stores meaning, not as piles, but as webs. When you return to these notes, you are not rereading, you are navigating. That navigation strengthens connections and accelerates understanding. But the most important principle of note-taking is this: review matters. Notes you never revisit become intellectual graveyards. People often take notes as if note-taking were the final step. In reality, note-taking is the first step of consolidation. Notes are memory seeds, and review is the water. Spaced review, revisiting notes at intervals, brings them back to the surface of awareness and prevents forgetting. Even brief reviews can save hours of relearning later. Note-taking also expands cognition by extending working memory. Working memory has limited capacity. Only a few pieces of information can be actively processed at once. If you try to hold everything in your head, the brain overloads. Notes free up mental bandwidth. They allow the brain to focus on deeper thinking, because temporary storage is handled externally. In this way, notes become a cognitive tool, not just a record. Another key insight: good notes should be personal. They should reflect your voice, your questions, your connections, and your interpretations. If your notes look like everyone else's, they probably didn't activate your brain enough. Add commentary, add doodles, add arrows, add comparisons, add reminders of how you could apply something. Personalization turns notes into a memory companion. The physical act of writing can also enhance memory. Handwriting slows you down just enough to force processing. Typing is faster, but can lead to verbatim capture and less thought. Neither method is universally superior. Both have strengths. Handwriting aids comprehension. Typing aids speed and organization. The right choice depends on the context and the purpose. The real danger is not how you take notes. It is not thinking while you take notes. Examples are another underutilized form of note enhancement. When you add examples, either from the text or from your own imagination, you move information toward real-world context. Context makes recall easier because it shows when and why a concept matters. The brain remembers why more easily than what. Examples give the why. Finally, great note-taking has a purpose: to make knowledge accessible later. Notes should be designed for future retrieval. If you capture everything but can't find anything, the notes are useless. Organize by topic, theme, project or question. Use indexes, digital tags, or searchable systems. A note you cannot retrieve is a note you effectively lost. When you learn to take better notes, you upgrade your brain in multiple dimensions. Attention increases because you listen actively. Understanding increases because you process and reorganize information. Memory strengthens because you retrieve and revisit. And application improves because you can actually find and use what you learned. In other words, note-taking is not just an academic skill. It is a life skill. It is a tool for building a smarter mind. Chapter 11. Turn knowledge into useful skill. Information becomes powerful only when it turns into skill. There is a difference between knowing something and being able to do something. Many people collect knowledge, but never convert it. They read about productivity, but never change how they work. They study languages, but never speak them. They learn financial principles, but never apply them to their money. They understand theories, but never see results. Learning without application creates a kind of intellectual storage. Learning with application creates transformation. To turn knowledge into skill, you must engage with information through practice. Practice is the bridge between theory and ability. It forces you to leave the comfort of knowing and enter the discomfort of doing. Doing feels harder because it demands feedback. When you do something, you find out immediately where your knowledge is shallow or where your assumptions were wrong. Feedback feels uncomfortable, but it is the fastest instructor you will ever meet. Books can inform you, teachers can guide you, feedback teaches you. Skill also requires repetition, but not blind repetition. Useful repetition is deliberate repetition. Deliberate repetition targets weaknesses, refines technique, and tracks improvement. Blind repetition simply burns time. If you practice incorrectly, you strengthen mistakes. If you practice deliberately, you strengthen skill. Deliberate practice asks the question, what specifically needs improvement, and isolates it. This is how musicians improve sections of a piece, how athletes refine movements, and how thinkers sharpen reasoning. Knowledge also becomes skill when you compress theory into action steps. Big ideas, without action steps, remain abstract. To make them concrete, you must identify how they appear in the real world. Ask, what does this idea look like when executed? What would be the smallest possible action for this? How would I know I'm doing it correctly? The brain learns faster when actions are specific, observable, and trackable. A vague concept leads to vague execution. A concrete step creates behavior. To convert knowledge into skill, you must also train retrieval under real conditions. Retrieval under ideal conditions, quiet room, no pressure, plenty of time, is good for memory, but not for performance. Performance requires retrieval under friction. Athletes call this pressure testing. Pressure testing creates stress, uncertainty, time limits, or stakes. When you can retrieve knowledge under friction, you can use it in real life. This is how learning sticks at the level of identity. Identity plays a bigger role than most people realize. Skill does not become stable until it becomes part of who you are. If you learn coding techniques without seeing yourself as a programmer, your improvement will plateau. If you study investment principles without adopting the identity of an investor, you won't execute consistently. Identity drives behavior. Behavior drives practice. Practice drives skill. Skill reinforces identity. This cycle is how mastery builds. Feedback loops accelerate the cycle. A feedback loop contains three components: action, result, and adjustment. You act, you evaluate the outcome, and you adjust. Many people skip the adjustment phase. They act and accept the result without learning from it. Without adjustment, skill growth is slow. Adjustment is where the brain upgrades. Adjustment tells the brain, this didn't work, change the approach. With enough adjustments, skill stabilizes. Knowledge also becomes skill when it is used in multiple contexts. If you only use an idea in one environment, it becomes situational knowledge. To make it robust, use it in different environments, with different people, under different conditions. This forces abstraction. Abstraction means extracting the principle from the situation. Once you understand the principle, you can apply it anywhere. That is the mark of true learning. Timing matters as well. Application should follow learning quickly. The longer the delay between learning and using, the higher the chance of forgetting. The brain prioritizes what you use. If you want it to keep something, use it soon, and use it often. This turns weak memories into stable ones, and stable ones into skills. The final stage of turning knowledge into skill is automation. Automation means the skill becomes effortless. You no longer think about the steps consciously. The brain handles them in the background. Driving a car is a good example. You don't mentally rehearse every movement. You just drive. Automation frees cognitive resources, allowing you to layer new skills on top. Mastery is built on stacked automations. To apply all of this, start with a simple rule. As soon as you learn something valuable, ask, how do I put this into action today? Not next year, not someday. Today, then identify a small test. A test turns theory into motion. It breaks the perfection barrier. Perfection prevents skill because perfection delays action. Action beats perfection every time. When you learn to turn knowledge into skill, learning stops being an intellectual hobby and becomes a strategic advantage. Knowledge alone can make you feel smart. Skills make you effective, and effectiveness is what shapes your career, your competence, your confidence, and your life. Chapter 12. Upgrade your processing speed and cognitive stamina. If you want to learn faster and remember longer, you must upgrade not only how you learn, but the mental machinery that supports learning. Two of the most important components of that machinery are processing speed and cognitive stamina. Processing speed is your brain's ability to interpret, analyze, and manipulate information quickly. Cognitive stamina is your ability to sustain mental effort over time without burning out or slowing down. When these two abilities improve, everything across your life becomes easier. Reading becomes easier. Problem solving becomes easier. Decision-making becomes easier, focus becomes easier, and learning accelerates. Processing speed is not about rushing, it's about mental efficiency. A slow processor wastes energy on basic interpretation before it reaches deeper understanding. A faster processor reaches deeper understanding sooner, which leaves more time for practice, reflection, and application. This is one of the reasons why some people appear to learn faster than others. It's not always because they are more intelligent. Often, they simply process information with less friction. One way to improve processing speed is to increase working memory capacity. Working memory is the mental space where you hold information temporarily while manipulating it. It's the brain's scratch pad. If working memory is overloaded, processing slows, tasks feel harder, comprehension breaks down, but when working memory is strengthened, thinking becomes smoother. You can hold more pieces in mind at once. You can make connections faster. You can read complex material without constantly backtracking. Games and activities that involve pattern recognition, sequencing, spatial reasoning, or strategy can help strengthen working memory, but so can real-world thinking tasks, such as explaining things out loud, solving problems without notes, or mentally organizing ideas before writing them down. Another method for increasing processing speed is reducing cognitive load. Cognitive load refers to the total mental effort required for a task. When cognitive load is high, processing slows dramatically. Reducing cognitive load doesn't mean making tasks easier. It means removing unnecessary friction. For example, organizing your learning environment, minimizing distractions, breaking tasks into steps, and clarifying what you're trying to learn before you begin. The brain processes best when it doesn't have to fight clutter, external or internal. Cognitive stamina is different but equally essential. Stamina determines how long you can think deeply before fatigue sets in. Most people can focus intensely for a few minutes before their attention dissolves. Their brain becomes restless, their thoughts scatter. They look for breaks. Low stamina makes deep learning impossible because deep learning requires time. Complex ideas cannot be processed in shallow fragments. They need sustained engagement. To build cognitive stamina, you must train it the same way athletes train physical endurance. Gradually, start with short blocks of deep focus, then increase the duration as you adapt. 10 minutes of concentrated effort can later become 20, then 30, then 45, then 60. This kind of training creates a mental environment where deep work feels normal instead of painful. Once cognitive stamina increases, tasks that once felt overwhelming become manageable. Breaks play an important role here. Stamina does not grow from endless, uninterrupted effort. It grows from cycles of effort followed by recovery. The brain needs moments of rest to consolidate information, reset attention, and replenish neurotransmitters. Micro breaks, short pauses between heavy thinking, are not wasted time. They are maintenance. They prevent burnout and enhance retention. The goal is not to eliminate breaks, but to structure them intentionally. Lifestyle also influences both processing speed and stamina. Sleep is one of the most important cognitive performance tools you'll ever have. Lack of sleep reduces reaction time, slows processing, weakens working memory, and blocks learning from transferring into long-term storage. Strong cognitive performance is built on consistent sleep, not occasional catch-up. Nutrition matters too. The brain runs on glucose and depends on micronutrients for neurotransmitter function. Hydration matters, oxygen matters, movement matters. It's hard to think well in a body that isn't supported. Another often overlooked factor is stress. Stress narrows cognitive bandwidth. It reduces creativity, shrinks working memory, and slows problem solving. Chronic stress lowers processing efficiency, because the brain keeps diverting resources toward threat response instead of learning. Learning thrives in environments of curiosity, not threat. To upgrade cognitive performance, you must manage stress through physical practices, through lifestyle choices, through boundaries, and through mental frameworks. Finally, the fastest way to improve both processing speed and stamina is to engage with challenging material regularly. Easy content does not strengthen the brain. Difficulty does. When you read something slightly above your current level of comprehension, or solve problems that demand new reasoning, or engage in tasks that stretch your understanding, you are training your brain. Difficulty is a signal for neural adaptation. The brain upgrades under challenge, not comfort. When processing speed and cognitive stamina improve, learning becomes something you can rely on instead of something you have to fight for. You begin to think more clearly, understand more quickly, remember more reliably, and work more deeply. And when the mind becomes capable of sustained, efficient effort, you gain one of the greatest advantages a human can possess: the ability to keep learning long after others have given up. Chapter 13. Protect the brain with better habits and lifestyle. You cannot upgrade your brain through learning strategies alone. Techniques matter, but the biological machine doing the work must be healthy enough to perform. A tired brain, a stressed brain, or a poorly nourished brain cannot process efficiently, cannot remember reliably, and cannot sustain attention long enough to reach mastery. Learning is not just a cognitive activity, it is a physical one. The quality of your brain's performance reflects the quality of the environment you create for it. If you want to learn faster and remember longer, you must protect the hardware that makes it possible. One of the most important variables is sleep. Sleep is not simply rest. Sleep is neural maintenance. During deep sleep, the brain consolidates memories, stabilizes learning, clears waste byproducts, and resets neurotransmitter levels. This is why learning something late at night without sleeping afterward feels slippery and difficult to retrieve. Without sleep, the brain cannot transfer short-term learning into long-term storage. Students often try to compensate for poor learning habits by sacrificing sleep, not realizing they are destroying the very mechanism that would help them remember. Sleep is not optional for cognitive performance, it is foundational. Nutrition is another pillar of brain protection. The brain represents only a small percentage of your body weight, yet it consumes a disproportionately high percentage of your energy. It requires stable glucose levels, healthy fats, amino acids, vitamins and minerals to synthesize neurotransmitters and sustain cognitive function. Diets loaded with sugar spikes, processed foods, and inflammatory compounds create volatile energy patterns that impair attention and memory. In contrast, whole foods, balanced macronutrients, and consistent hydration give the brain the raw materials it needs to work smoothly. Many people blame themselves for having low focus when the real issue is biochemical. Movement also plays a crucial role. Physical activity increases blood flow to the brain, boosts oxygen levels, stimulates neurotrophic factors like BDNF, which helps neurons grow, and reduces stress hormones. Even short bouts of movement can improve mental clarity and learning capacity. The brain and body are not separate systems, they are deeply intertwined. Physical stagnation often leads to cognitive stagnation, while physical activation enhances mental activation. Exercise is not just a fitness tool, it is a learning tool. Stress management is another category of brain protection that cannot be ignored. Stress is useful in short bursts, but destructive when chronic. Chronic stress floods the brain with cortisol, which impairs memory, disrupts learning, weakens immune function and narrows cognitive flexibility. When stress becomes a background state, thinking becomes reactive instead of reflective. Curiosity disappears, and threat vigilance takes over. The brain cannot build new neural pathways efficiently when it is constantly preparing for danger. Learning requires psychological safety. To reduce stress, you need both external boundaries, such as limiting toxic environments, and internal practices, such as breathing techniques, mindfulness, journaling, or reframing stresses as challenges instead of threats. Digital hygiene has become a modern necessity for brain protection. Constant notifications, fragmented attention, information overload, and addictive platforms all tax cognitive resources. Every time you switch tasks or check your phone, your brain pays a switching cost. These micro costs accumulate, weakening focus and reducing cognitive stamina. Protecting the brain means controlling its inputs. You must decide what gets access to your attention and what does not. Eliminating digital clutter is as important as eliminating physical clutter. When the brain has fewer competing stimuli, it can direct more energy toward learning. Environmental design matters as well. The spaces you work and learn in influence the brain's ability to focus. Bright screens, noisy environments, cluttered desks, and chaotic surroundings create cognitive noise. A clean, orderly space sends a signal of clarity and control. Lighting matters. Air quality matters. Even seating matters. You are not just creating a place to learn, you are creating a place where the brain feels supported enough to perform its best. Another overlooked component of brain protection is rest, not just sleep, but cognitive rest. The brain cannot operate in sustained high-intensity mode without recovery. Rest includes relaxation, daydreaming, nature exposure, and leisure activities that do not demand structured thinking. These moments allow the brain to reorganize, integrate, and reset. Many breakthroughs in science, art, and invention have occurred during unstructured rest, not during intense effort. Rest is not wasted time, it is processing time. Social connection also influences cognitive health. The brain is wired for interaction, collaboration, and communication. Isolation can weaken cognitive sharpness, while meaningful conversation stimulates memory, language, empathy, and reasoning. Even teaching and discussing what you learn activates retention pathways. Surrounding yourself with curious, growth-oriented people enhances cognitive resilience. Surrounding yourself with negativity drains it. Lastly, mental framing matters. A brain that is constantly fed helplessness, fear, or defeat deteriorates. A brain that is fed possibility, challenge, and purpose strengthens. Internal dialogue shapes neural patterns. Stressful thinking produces stress chemistry. Empowering thinking produces adaptive chemistry. Protecting the brain means protecting the narrative running inside it. The point is simple. Your brain's performance is not just a matter of intelligence, it is a matter of environment, lifestyle, and habit. When you protect the biological foundation, learning becomes easier. When you neglect it, no amount of strategy will compensate. If you want to upgrade your brain, you must treat it like the powerful instrument it is. Nurture it, support it, protect it, and it will repay you with clarity, memory, and capacity for years to come. Chapter 14. Use technology to enhance thinking. We live in a time where technology can multiply your cognitive abilities if used wisely, or quietly erode them if used carelessly. Tools that were once limited to researchers, scholars, and high-level thinkers are now in everyone's pocket. You can store knowledge, retrieve information, organize ideas, schedule tasks, manage memories, track habits, and even simulate thinking with the help of software. But here's the critical distinction. Technology should enhance thinking, not replace it. When technology becomes a substitute for cognition instead of an amplifier of cognition, the brain stops growing. To use technology correctly, you must first understand its role. The brain has strengths and weaknesses. It excels at creativity, pattern recognition, reasoning, abstraction, and emotional evaluation. It struggles with storage, retrieval of vast data, error-free calculations, and long-term organization of knowledge. Technology excels precisely where the brain struggles. Tools can store thousands of facts, reminders, references, and frameworks without cognitive decay. The goal, then, is to partner with technology. Let it handle what the brain finds inefficient, so the brain can focus on what only it can do. However, using technology without intention leads to cognitive outsourcing. Outsourcing is not inherently bad. Your phone remembering phone numbers is harmless. But when the brain outsources too much, it stops building internal structure. Many people rely on search engines for answers they could have learned. They rely on notes for ideas they never processed. They rely on reminders for commitments they never internalized. The result is a brain that becomes dependent rather than empowered. Tools become crutches instead of extensions. To avoid this, treat technology as scaffolding. Scaffolding supports the formation of skill, but is removed once the skill is stable. For example, spaced repetition apps are a powerful tool for long-term memory, but you must still retrieve knowledge actively. Note-taking software is useful for storing information, but you must still reason about that information. Task managers are useful for organizing priorities, but you must still decide what matters. If the tool removes cognitive work entirely, it removes cognitive growth. Technology can also enhance learning speed through organization. Tools like digital note systems, mind mapping software, annotation tools, and flashcard apps allow you to capture, categorize, and review ideas efficiently. Without organization, knowledge sits in chaos. With organization, knowledge becomes accessible. The brain loves structure, and technology can provide that structure faster than pen and paper when used deliberately. Another category of technological enhancement involves tracking. Data around sleep, focus, habits, reading time, or performance can show patterns that the mind cannot easily detect. The brain experiences life subjectively. Technology reveals it objectively. When you see measurable patterns, such as how sleep affects your productivity or how often you actually practice a skill, your decisions become sharper. Awareness improves behavior, and improved behavior upgrades the brain. But technology must not be allowed to fracture attention. Many digital tools are designed to hijack the brain rather than support it. Notifications fragment concentration. Social platforms reward novelty-seeking over deep thinking. Endless feeds encourage consumption over creation. The brain becomes reactive instead of reflective. A powerful rule for brain protection is to use technology deliberately rather than habitually. Tools you choose to open are allies. Tools that open themselves are enemies. Another important principle is to separate cognitive tools from cognitive entertainment. Cognitive entertainment gives the illusion of learning. Watching educational videos, listening to intellectual content, browsing articles, but without engagement, application, or retention. Cognitive tools, on the other hand, require action, note-taking, flashcards, writing, practicing, planning, teaching. Both have value, but only one upgrades the brain. The smartest learners are not the ones who consume the most information. They are the ones who convert consumption into skill. To make technology a multiplier rather than a distraction, create boundaries. For instance, designate certain tools for output, writing, note systems, spaced repetition, problem solving, and certain tools for input, books, lectures, courses. Keep them separated. Input alone does not produce growth. Output forces retrieval, synthesis, and application. When the brain produces, it learns. Another practice is to integrate technology with analog methods. You might brainstorm on paper, but store organized notes digitally. You might practice recall with flashcards, but reflect in a journal. The hybrid approach gives you the benefits of both worlds: technology for storage and efficiency, analog for depth and presence. The most important shift is this: see technology as part of your cognitive ecosystem, not as a replacement for it. Your brain is not meant to work alone, but it is also not meant to surrender. A calculator doesn't make you worse at math if you understand the principles. A note system doesn't weaken memory if you still retrieve and summarize. A spaced repetition app doesn't reduce thinking if you still reason about the material. A tool becomes harmful only when it eliminates the struggle necessary for growth. Ultimately, the purpose of technology in learning is amplification. Amplify your attention by blocking distractions. Amplify your memory through structured review. Amplify your productivity through organizing tasks. Amplify your thinking by freeing cognitive space. Amplify your creativity by storing raw material for future ideas. When used in this way, technology becomes one of the greatest cognitive multipliers of our era. But the brain must remain the driver. Tools are extensions of thought, not replacements for thought. If you maintain that relationship, you will harness the full power of technology while preserving and strengthening the extraordinary capabilities of your mind. Chapter 15. Become a lifelong learner with a compound brain. The true upgrade of the brain does not happen in a week or a month or even a year. It happens across a lifetime. The most powerful learners are not the ones who study intensely for brief seasons. They are the ones who never stop learning, who never stop refining, who never stop expanding. They adopt the identity of a lifelong learner, and because of that identity, their knowledge compounds. The compounding of knowledge is one of the greatest advantages a human being can acquire. It makes learning easier, thinking sharper, memory stronger, and creativity more effortless. The compound brain is not built by accident. It is built by consistency. A lifelong learner understands that knowledge is fuel. It fuels decisions, opportunities, careers, relationships, problem-solving, and personal evolution. They do not learn because they were told to, or because a curriculum demanded it, or because an exam was scheduled. They learn because they recognize what learning gives them. It gives them leverage. It gives them adaptability. It gives them clarity in a world that is constantly shifting. The person who learns continuously will always outperform the person who relies solely on past knowledge. The world evolves. The brain must evolve with it. One of the biggest mindset shifts toward becoming a lifelong learner is curiosity. Curiosity is the engine of sustained learning. Without curiosity, learning feels like work. With curiosity, learning feels like exploration. Children learn rapidly because they are curious about everything. Adults often lose that curiosity because they trade wonder for certainty. They believe they already know enough. They cling to fixed beliefs. They stop asking questions. When curiosity dies, the brain stagnates. To revive learning, you must revive questioning. Ask why things are the way they are. Ask how systems work. Ask what principles lie behind the surface. Curiosity is not childish, it is intelligent. A lifelong learner also builds routines around learning. They do not wait for free time or inspiration. They schedule learning into their life the way others schedule entertainment. This does not mean studying all day. It means feeding the brain consistently. 10 pages a day for a year is 3,650 pages. One insightful podcast a day for a year is 365 ideas. One new skill practiced for 20 minutes a day for a year is over 120 hours of focused improvement. Compounding works in small increments. The brain grows through repetition and time, but lifelong learning is not only about absorbing information, it is about revisiting, connecting, applying and refining. The compound brain does not treat knowledge as separate events. It treats knowledge as a growing ecosystem, where new ideas plug into existing frameworks. Each year, the ecosystem becomes richer, more organized, and more powerful. Learning that seemed difficult years ago suddenly becomes easier because the structures to support it are already in place. This is why the knowledgeable continue accelerating. Knowledge builds pathways for new knowledge. To maintain lifelong learning, you must also remain adaptable. Adaptability is the willingness to update your beliefs when presented with new evidence. Many people cling to outdated beliefs, even when they stop being useful. They defend what they know instead of expanding what they know. A lifelong learner views their beliefs as tools, not identities. They adjust theories when new data arrives. They revise their frameworks. The brain that updates grows. The brain that refuses stagnates. Another key to becoming a lifelong learner is balancing depth and breadth. Depth gives you mastery. Breadth gives you flexibility. Depth makes you strong in a domain. Breadth allows you to connect domains. The most creative thinkers are often individuals with deep expertise in one field and broad curiosity across many others. Innovation often emerges at the intersections, where concepts from one field merge with concepts from another. A compound brain becomes both a specialist and a connector. Lifelong learners also understand that teaching reinforces learning. They share ideas. They discuss concepts. They explain what they've learned. Teaching solidifies memory, clarifies understanding, and spreads insight. A world built on sharing knowledge accelerates the growth of all minds involved. Each conversation becomes a training ground for refinement. To sustain lifelong learning, you must also surround yourself with people who value growth. A stagnant environment kills curiosity. A complacent circle kills ambition. But an environment full of thinkers, readers, builders, creators, and explorers ignites learning by proximity. You rise to the level of the intellectual environment you inhabit. If you want your brain to keep growing, surround it with other growing brains. Finally,